Morning everybody. Today I'm going to be talking to you about planning a response to an exam question. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this, and essentially you need to find one that suits the style of your thinking, the style that really works for you in an exam setting. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways, and I would suggest that as you're doing assessments in school or if you're writing an essay for homework, you have a go at a couple of different methods and find the one that suits you and then really develop that one. So the first one that we're looking at here is using a spider diagram method to plan your answer. And you can see I've written the question in the middle: how does Khaled Hosseini present gender in The Kite Runner? And I've started to have a bit of a think about the different characters that I could write about in the text. So I've got Sanibar, and I've just written here a couple of key words about her. I've linked it into a couple of quotations. I'm keeping my quotations and my notes really short in my plan, because really you've only got about 5 minutes to do this in the exam. And over here you can see that I've got Jamila, and then I'm linking it here to a key concept, that she's a symbol of traditional acceptance of patriarchal values. So I'm going to model this, and I'm just going to add another character on the bottom here. So I'm going to think about the character of Soraya, who is a rebellious character. She runs away from home. But ultimately she manages to find a compromise between being independent and conforming. And I would also have a little think about which bits of direct evidence from the text I might use to back that up. So I'm thinking here about the fact that she reads Wuthering Heights when the main character in the novel first meets her, which is a symbol of female independence, of emancipation, of the struggles that women go through in a patriarchal society. I'm not writing all of those ideas down because I've revised really well for this exam. So just writing down Wuthering Heights is enough to remind me of all of those ideas. It's a trigger word really for those ideas. I might jot down a few more quotations and so on. So then the next thing that I would do, once I've got the three characters that I'm going to look at in my essay, is I need to think about how I'm going to structure the essay and what order I'm going to put these ideas in when I'm writing. Now, I would always go for, maybe not always, I'd usually go for a chronological method of structuring an essay, particularly in an exam setting, because it gives you a really strong anchor, a really strong narrative for your essay. So, first of all, I'm going to put a number 1 beside Sanibar, because she would be the first female character that we encounter in the text. And then I'm going to put a number 2 beside Soraya, and a number 3 beside Jamila. I'm going to change that and put my number 2 over here. I'm going to go to Jamila, and then I'm probably going to go back number 4 for this section here. So then if you want to make it really clear, you could just jot down the order and start to shape it into an argument. So I'm going to go 1, Sanibar, rebellious, and I'm going to say that she's destroyed by the patriarchy. So pretty bleak idea to start with. Then I'm going to go for 2, Soraya echoes Sanibar's narrative, also destroyed. Then I'm going to go for number 3, Jamila. Again, all of these characters are kind of echoing each other, aren't they? So I'm going to say that Jamila is silenced by the patriarchy as well. So ultimately what I've got here is the strength of masculinity. So that's my kind of overarching idea, my big idea, and I've done another video about using big concepts in your essays. Then 4, I'm going to go back to Soraya, and I'm going to look a little bit at the other side of the argument now. So Soraya, I'm going to say, finds a compromise. And of course that is echoed in Jamila and Sanibar and what happens to them at the end of the novel as well. So Soraya finds a compromise, but then I'm going to say ultimately women have a long way to go. Okay, so I've got kind of 5 paragraphs mapped out there. That's not taken me any longer than 5 minutes in an exam setting. And I'm keeping my notes really short, really brief, and just using trigger words that I've planned before in my revision to help me to do that. Okay, here's another method, and this is one that actually I much prefer, using a table to organise your planning. And I prefer this just because it seems a bit more logical to me. It fits with the way my brain works. So the question here is, to what extent does Shakespeare present Desdemona as a passive victim? And if we look here at the type of question, to what extent is prompting us to make an argument which says, yes, you can agree with the question for all of these reasons, but on the other hand, you might disagree with it because of this reason. So I've divided my table into 2 columns. I've got my agree column, my agree line of argument on one side and my disagree on the other. So you see here that I've just started to jot down ideas as they come to me. They're not in any particular order. So I've got Act 3, Scene 4, Desdemona is increasingly silenced, bewildered. Act 2, Scene 4, she tries to be involved in the action but is silenced by Othello. Act 5, Scene 2, she doesn't resist her murderer. So I need to jot down a couple of ideas to show that she is rebellious. So I'm just going to put Act 1, Scene 3. She stands up to the Senate. I'm going to put Act 2, Scene 1. She jests bodily with Iago. Okay, so the next thing I need to do, as with the previous example, I need to decide what order I'm going to put these ideas in. And as I've said, I would generally go for a chronological order. Now, with this one, because we're also trying to get these 2 different lines of argument in, that makes it a little bit more complicated. So there's a couple of different ways that we could do this. I could go 1 for Act 1, 2 for Act 2, and then 3 for Act 2, 4, 5. And in terms of the structure of my argument, that would then mean that I'm going from rebellious in the first paragraph, rebellious in the second, and then increasingly silenced in the next few paragraphs. So that's if I wanted to go chronologically. A structure that I often teach my students, though, is the XXXOX structure. And the X stands for your main line of argument, and the O stands for the other point of view, the other side of the argument. So for this, I could go, let's see, so passive in these ones here. Active for my other side, and passive back into the main line of argument. So I can put Act 2, Scene 4 here. Then I could have 3, Scene 4, 5, Scene 2. I'm going to pick Act 1, Scene 3 for this one. And then I might return to Act 5, Scene 2 for the end. So you can do it either way. It really doesn't matter. I think I would prefer the chronological one just because I can see an easier line of argument for this. But honestly, it doesn't matter. As long as you've got a clear argument and it's a clearly planned response. Okay, the last example then is, again, using a table, but showing you how to compare different text in your answers, because some of the essay questions you might be asked to do might be about more than one text. And so here my question is, how do writers present tragic settings? And I'm looking at Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller, and I'm looking at the poetry of John Keats here. So again, in no particular order, I've spent a couple of minutes before I've done this video just jotting down my ideas here for Death of a Salesman. You can see they're a little bit messy because I wanted to give you the impression of what could actually be achieved in a couple of minutes. So we've got the opening stage directions, then looking at the garden, looking at the kitchen, and looking at the expressionist staging. So I need a couple of ideas for Keats. So one of the poems that we look at on the A-level, at least at my school, is called La Belle Dame, and the setting is very sterile and very entrapping. We also look at a poem called The Eve of St. Agnes. And what I find really interesting about the setting in that is, a little bit bizarrely, the lattice windows. And lattice windows are where you have like a crisscross shape like that in the window. And this links in with the idea of entrapment. Also in St. Agnes, we might think about the storm at the end, which is very oppressive and foreshadows death. Sorry, doing tragedy isn't always the cheeriest thing. And we could also have, in a poem called Isabella, we could think about the forest. And again, this sense of oppression, even in a natural setting. We also have the idea in Isabella that capitalism is destroying nature. Okay, so I've jotted down all of my ideas there, and the next thing I would do with this style of comparison style of essay is to draw lines to link my ideas together. So I'm going to do that with a highlighter so you can see really clearly. So opening stage directions from Death of a Salesman, we're thinking about oppressiveness and entrapment. And just looking at what matches down my Keats side, I think I would connect those two ideas together. Sorry, you can't see that clearly at all, can you? Change colour. So we're linking oppression and entrapment with oppression and entrapment on this side. Then my second idea for Death of a Salesman is about the garden being sterile, you can't grow the seeds and so on, and that links up with La Belle Dame up there. So I'm going to draw an arrow up to there. Then we've got the kitchen, obsolescence, emptiness, hopelessness and so on. I mean, it could link to quite a few different things. I'm going to link it across to the storm, I think. Just looking at Isabella here, this idea of capitalism links back to Death of a Salesman really nicely, so I'm going to put that up that direction. I'm not sure that I've got a direct link for the expressionist staging in Death of a Salesman, so I'm just going to leave that for the minute. And then underneath, because this is starting to look like a bit of a mess, I'm just going to map out what my 5 paragraphs in my essay might be. So I'm going to start with Death of a Salesman, and I'm going to start with the opening stage directions. You'll see I'm using abbreviations, I'm using notes because I've only got 5 minutes, so I want to keep this really, really short. So I'm going to look at the stage directions, and then I think I'm going to link that in firstly with Isabella and capitalism. And then I'm going to add on this idea about the Eve of St. Agnes, the lattice windows. So the words I'm writing down again are just trigger words that are suggesting a whole range of different ideas to me that I've kind of prepared in my revision for this. My second paragraph, I'm going to move into Death of a Salesman and the idea of sterility, which I'm going to link into La Belle Dame and the sterile setting. Right, my third paragraph, I'm going to link into the kitchen from Death of a Salesman, and I'm going to put that with this storm from St. Agnes. Okay, now this, even though I say these are 3 paragraphs, these could potentially split in half each because you're comparing. So actually, I maybe don't need all 5 here, so I'm just going to cross that 5th one out. And then in my 4th one, I think I'm going to look at the expressionist staging in Death of a Salesman. Okay, so what I've got there is planned, 4 different ideas. These paragraphs might split into 2, but generally I'd have 4 kind of sections of my essay. I might not have time to write all of that in the exam, but at least I've got plenty of ideas to go with, so I know what I'm moving on to next. In terms of an argument as well here, if we look at it, what we're suggesting is that tragic settings reflect the oppression of society. So I might just jot that down as well to remind myself what my overall argument in this essay is going to be. So I'll do a couple of more videos just to unpick some of those ideas that I've talked about today. So I'll perhaps do a video on how to write a comparative paragraph, for example, maybe a video on how to make a really strong argument as well. So make sure you check out the other videos on this thread. Thank you very much for listening.